premiering in 1995. Star Trek Voyager was a weekly hope that overcame adversity, becoming the must-watch Monday night television show of millions of Americans' dreams. But behind the strength and personality of the characters on the show were real-life tragedies and pain that brought tears to everyone's eyes. Let's explore the true stories that are rarely shared behind the camera. Majel Barrett as the voice of the Federation, the woman who never truly faded. Majel Barrett. Born Majel Lee Hudick on February 23, 1932 in Cleveland, Ohio, carried a presence that felt larger than the screen itself. Long before she became the eternal voice of Starfleet computers, she was a theater-trained actress navigating a Hollywood that often refused to take women seriously unless they fit a mold she never cared for. She joined Star Trek in the 1960s, first as Nurse Chapel, later as Lwaxana Troi, and by the time the next generation arrived, she had become something almost mythic, the calm, omnipresent voice guiding every ship in the Federation. She was 63 when she fully embraced that role, stepping into a place no one else would ever occupy. But behind that iconic voice was a woman who lived through profound loneliness. Her husband, Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek, passed away in 1991, leaving her with a grief she rarely showed in public. Their son drifted away emotionally during those years, and Majel carried the weight of a family that had slowly scattered. As her fame within the franchise grew, her real world grew smaller, fewer friends, fewer visits, and long stretches of silence in a house once filled with creative noise. In the 2000s, she began battling leukemia, a fight she kept private until the very end. Fans heard her voice everywhere, but the tragic irony was that in her final years, hardly anyone heard her. Majel Barrett passed away on December 18, 2008, at age 76, leaving behind a legacy unlike any other in television history. Even after her death, her voice continued to echo across the franchise, thanks to recordings she made in her final months, a deliberate act to remain part of the universe she and Gene built together. By the time Star Trek Prodigy arrived in 2025, generations of fans were still hearing her calm, unmistakable tone. Majel Barrett was flesh and bone fragile like anyone else, but her voice, steady and ageless, became the one part of Star Trek that truly felt immortal. Jeri Ryan as 7 of 9, the woman trapped inside perfection. Jeri Lynn Ryan, born February 22, 1968 in Munich, Germany, was 29 when she stepped into the sleek silver skin of 7 of 9 on Star Trek Voyager. A former Miss Illinois and a classically trained actress, she carried a striking blend of intelligence and presence that made 7 instantly unforgettable. Her character, a reclaimed Borg drone learning to be human again, became one of the series' emotional pillars. But the polished exterior of 7, flawless and unblinking, hid the very human woman underneath, one still finding her own footing in Hollywood's harsh spotlight. Behind the cool precision of 7 of 9 was a brutal reality few fans ever knew. The famous silver catsuit designed to make her look impossibly perfect was so tight she could barely breathe, couldn't sit, and often couldn't go to the bathroom for hours. Jeri fainted more than once on set from lack of oxygen, pushing through each day with a discipline bordering on punishment. Off camera, her personal life collapsed. Her marriage fell apart just as her character became a worldwide sensation, leaving her to raise her young son while tabloids stalked her every move. Hollywood typecast her instantly the icy beauty, the sexy robot shutting her out of roles that required softness or vulnerability. She later admitted that the years after Voyager were some of the loneliest of her life, spent trying to convince an industry that she was more than the suit that nearly broke her. Today, in her 57, Jeri Ryan has reclaimed her career and her peace. Her role in Bosch helped her shed the image that long overshadowed her, and returning as 7 in Star Trek Picard allowed her to explore the character with a freedom she never had in the 90s raw human and fully in control. She now lives a quieter life, centered on family cooking and choosing projects that honor her boundaries. Fans still see 7 as an icon of strength, But Jeri Ryan's real legacy is something softer. The resilience of a woman who survived objectification, loneliness, and expectation, and emerged finally as herself. Jennifer Lien as Kes, the gentle soul who couldn't outrun her own storms. Jennifer Ann Lien, born August 24th, 1974 in Illinois, was only 21 years old when she joined Star Trek Voyager as Kes, the soft-spoken Ocampa, with extraordinary mental powers and a purity that made her one of the ship's quiet, emotional centers. With her delicate features and calming presence, she brought a rare gentleness to a franchise built on action and exploration. She seemed destined for a long career when she stepped onto the Voyager set in 1995, carrying a talent that felt instinctive rather than trained. But the innocence she projected on screen was a fragile reflection of a far more turbulent reality waiting behind the curtain. After leaving Voyager in Season 3, Jennifer's life unraveled in ways few could have predicted. She began struggling with severe bipolar disorder, a condition that grew worse over the years and repeatedly pushed her to the edge. By the mid-2010s, she faced a series of arrests not out of malice, but out of an untreated mind in crisis, drifting from one episode to the next without stable support. Hollywood had long since forgotten her, and conventions once a lifeline for many Trek alumni became impossible for her to attend. She withdrew completely from the public eye, living in near total isolation as her world grew smaller and quieter. The heartbreaking truth was that the woman who once played an empathic bright light on Voyager spent her real life battling a darkness she never managed to escape. In her 51s, Jennifer disappeared entirely from the industry, choosing privacy over public struggle. Those who knew her say she wanted nothing more than peace far from cameras and expectations. Though her career was brief, her portrayal of Kes left a lasting imprint on fans who still remember the warmth she brought to every scene. Jennifer's story became a sobering reminder of how fragile early success can be and how easily a gentle soul can be overwhelmed without support. Manu Intiraymi, as Icheb, the boy who escaped the collective but not Hollywood. Manu Intiraymi, born April 22, 1978 in Santa Cruz, California, was in his 22 when he stepped into the role of Icheb, the brilliant former Borg adolescent introduced in Star Trek Voyager. With sharp features and an earnest intensity, he brought unexpected depth to a character who symbolized resilience, loyalty, and the painful process of reclaiming lost humanity. Though his screen time was limited, Icheb quickly became a quiet fan favorite, the prodigy who survived the collective and found a new family aboard Voyager. For Manu, the role seemed like a promising launchpad into a wider Hollywood career. But the promise of Icheb soon became a cage. Hollywood typecast. Manu instantly as the Borg kid, a sci-fi curiosity rather than a full actor. No matter how hard he tried to branch out, major roles never came, and casting directors saw only the implants and prosthetics he once wore. By the late 2010s, the difficulties of surviving the industry took a darker turn in 2019. Manu received a serious threat from an obsessive fan, a frightening reminder that being recognizable can be dangerous, even when the spotlight has faded. While some Voyager alumni found refuge in conventions, Manu's experience with fandom was far more complicated, leaving him wrestling with disillusionment and a sense that the industry had, in his own words, assimilated him long before he realized it. In his 47, Manu walked away from the Hollywood system and rebuilt his life on his own terms. He turned toward independent filmmaking, producing small projects that allowed him creative freedom, something he never found in the studio machine. Eventually, he moved to Peru, where he lives a quieter, more reflective life far from the noise of Los Angeles. Though his career didn't unfold the way fans once imagined, Manu's legacy remains tied to Icheb, a symbol of survival individuality, and the struggle to define oneself outside any collective, whether Borg or Hollywood. Anthony DeLongis, as Culluh the warrior who bled for the screen. Anthony DeLongis, born March 23, 1950, grew up between California's sun-drenched suburbs and the quieter rhythms of Ontario. By the time he stepped into the role of Culluh on Star Trek Voyager, he was already in his 45, a disciplined performer with a commanding presence, a resonant voice, and the sharp physical precision of a lifelong martial artist. Years of Shakespearean theater had etched a certain authority into his movements, while his mastery of blades, whips, and horseback stunts gave Culluh a ferocity that felt startlingly real. He wasn't just playing a Kazon warlord, he carried the body and discipline of a man shaped by danger. Behind the brutal mask of Culluh, Anthony lived a life where danger wasn't scripted. It was routine. Long before his guest appearance on Voyager, he had already paid a devastating physical price for his craft. Bones snapped under the force of falls, collisions, and weapon work. Muscles tore. Joints quietly surrendered. He often joked that stuntmen don't age, they merely accumulate damage. But the truth was darker. Each injury stole something, a bit of movement, a bit of ease, a bit of peace. One sword sequence nearly ended him. A misjudged angle, a slip in timing, and the steel swept toward him with lethal speed. In that haunting instant, Anthony realized how thin the line was between performance and oblivion. It was a moment that stayed with him, a private reminder that while Culluh died on screen, he himself had come far closer off it. As he once said with a quiet, tired smile, Culluh died in fiction. I almost didn't make it in reality. Today, in his 75, Anthony lives a gentler chapter, one filled with the steadiness he once chased from set to set. He teaches sword work and whip technique to Hollywood actors, guiding younger performers through the craft that once nearly destroyed him. His home life is quiet, rooted in the companionship of his wife and the peace earned by a man who survived his own profession. Garrett Wang as Ensign Harry Kim, the man who stayed young while his life grew heavy. Garrett Wang, born December 15, 1968, stepped into Star Trek Voyager at just 27, carrying the gentle energy of a newcomer who still believed in possibility. His soft features, earnest smile, and naturally warm presence made him the perfect Harry Kim, the bright-eyed ensign who never seemed hardened by the darkness of deep space. On screen, he embodied innocence in a universe built on loss and conflict, giving older audiences a reminder of what hope once looked like. But that baby-faced charm, the very quality that won him the role, would later become the invisible cage shaping his entire career. Behind the scenes, the role that brought him into millions of homes slowly carved an emotional wound. For 7 long years, Garrett remained an ensign not only in the script, but in real life. While his co-stars received raises, promotions, and narrative depth, he was quietly told he couldn't grow because the producers feared losing his fresh-faced innocence. What began as a character choice became a painful typecast. Hollywood saw only Harry, never Garrett. After Voyager auditions dried up, the casting directors smiled kindly, then whispered the same sentence: "We still see Ensign Kim." At conventions, fans would greet him warmly, but always as Harry. He began living in hotels nearly 300 nights a year, drifting from one Trek event to another, smiling for photos, while fighting a loneliness that felt bottomless. In 2015, he admitted a truth he had carried in silence. He had fallen into depression because nobody remembered my real name. The universe that gave him a home had also swallowed him whole. Today, at 57, Garrett has found a gentler place to stand. The conventions are still there, but they no longer define him. In 2020, he and Robert Duncan McNeill launched The Delta Flyers, a podcast where they revisit Voyager episode by episode, not as trapped characters, but as older men healing old wounds. He still jokes with a touch of weary grace that he's the oldest ensign in Starfleet. But now he says it with a softened heart, a man who has made peace with the role that both lifted and confined him. Kate Mulgrew as Captain, Kathryn Janeway, the woman who carried a starship, while her own world fell apart. Kate Mulgrew, born April 29, 1955, stepped into Star Trek Voyager in her 40s, with a presence so commanding, it reshaped the franchise. Her voice, steady, clipped, unmistakably authoritative, carried the weight of a captain who made decisions alone in the dark of deep space. She stood tall, shoulders square, hair coiled in a sculpted crown, projecting a strength that felt unbreakable to viewers who treasured her as the first woman to truly command a Starfleet series. To an older generation of fans, Janeway was certainty, discipline, and moral clarity, a beacon in a drifting century. Yet the power she projected on screen concealed a quieter, more fragile truth. While Janeway never faltered, Kate was fighting a far lonelier battle. She spent all 7 years of Voyager as a single mother raising 2 young sons while her marriage dissolved behind closed doors. After shouting orders on the bridge all day, she would sit alone in her car on the Paramount lot crying before the long drive home, not from weakness, but from the whiplash of returning to a household where no one listened, where authority meant nothing, where exhaustion replaced applause. Hollywood, too, built a subtle prison around her. The same strength that made Janeway iconic became a brand she couldn't escape. Casting directors insisted she was too commanding, too decisive, too captain. Dozens of roles requiring softness, vulnerability, or fragility were quietly handed to others. Her own life became a study in emotional repression, a woman celebrated for her strength and punished for it in the same breath. As she later confessed with a weary honesty, I was the captain at work. At home, I was just a mother of 2 boys who didn't listen. Only in her 60s did Kate finally reclaim herself. Orange is the New Black offered her a new identity. Red, the fierce yet wounded prison matriarch who allowed her to explore tenderness, anger, and vulnerability without the armor of a starship captain. Her memoir, Born with Teeth 2015, became a quiet exhale, a place where she could lay down decades of restraint and speak in her own voice. Today, in her 70s, she lives on a rural property surrounded by dogs, trees, and the slow rhythms she once sacrificed for work. No spotlight, no bridge, no starship, just a woman who has finally allowed herself to rest. And in that peace, she has found something Janeway never could, a life lived on her own terms. Robert Beltran, as Commander Chakotay, the man who carried silence instead of stardom. Robert Beltran, born in 1953 in California's Central Valley, stepped into Star Trek Voyager with a presence defined by calm intensity. In his early 42, when he became Chakotay, he brought to the role a quiet dignity, a stillness that felt spiritual, rooted, unwavering. On screen, he became Janeway's anchor, loyal, introspective, almost monk-like in his restraint. Yet beneath that composed surface, the man behind Chakotay carried a very different kind of story, one shaped not by prophecy or spirit quests, but by the harsher realities of Hollywood. Behind the scenes, Robert lived with a stereotype he never asked for. Though proudly Mexican-American, the industry insisted on painting him as a Native American archetype complete with spiritual tropes and symbolic tattoos. The role that made him visible also narrowed him, trapping him in a version of himself he barely recognized. And when he voiced political opinions that didn't align with the majority in Hollywood, doors quietly closed. Casting calls slowed. Scripts never arrived. He became a man Hollywood didn't know what to do with, neither villain nor hero, neither fully embraced nor openly rejected. When Voyager ended, opportunities shrank to a whisper. He watched as his castmates moved forward while he remained tethered to the same character, the same label, the same expectation. Years later, with a voice heavy but honest, he said, Chakotay was a prisoner of stereotype. I'm an actor, not an icon. It was the confession of a man who carried the emotional weight of representation without ever receiving the freedom that should have come with it. In the years since Robert has retreated to a gentler world, the stage, Shakespeare became his refuge, a place where he could shed every label and speak in a voice entirely his own. He performs and directs in intimate Los Angeles theaters, far from studio politics, far from the expectations that once confined him. 72 years old, he lives quietly, almost deliberately unseen. No starship, no stereotypes, just a man returning to the simple craft of acting words, breath, and truth. In the stillness he chose, he has found the peace that Hollywood never offered him. Roxann Dawson as B'Elanna Torres, the woman who carried a starship and a pregnancy at the same time. Roxann Dawson, born in 1958 and raised in Los Angeles, brought a rare mix of fire and vulnerability to Star Trek Voyager. As B'Elanna Torres, half Klingon, half human, all heart, she became the emotional pulse of the starship, brilliant, impulsive, fiercely loyal, and impossible not to love. In her late 30s, when the series began, she crafted a character who was both warrior and engineer, someone whose temper masked a lifetime of quiet hurt. Roxann's performance resonated especially with viewers who felt in between in their own identity. On screen, she seemed unstoppable, a woman who could fix a warp core with one hand and punch out a Klingon with the other. But off-screen, the battles were far more personal and far more dangerous. During Voyager's 7th season, Roxann was living a double life, the fierce engineer on camera and a pregnant mother fighting exhaustion off camera. The studio hid her growing belly behind toolkits, consoles, and conveniently placed bulkheads, a visual trick that worked for the audience, but not for her body. She worked 16-hour days on metal floors under hot lights, sprinting between takes while trying not to collapse. The stress and intensity nearly cost her the pregnancy. Beyond physical strain, Hollywood saw her as the tough sci-fi woman, the engineer, the fighter, never the romantic lead, never the soft character, never the woman allowed to simply be desirable. That box became suffocating. Years later, with trademark sharp humor, she summed up that brutal final season. B'Elanna was smashing consoles. I was smashing my pregnant belly into toolboxes. Today, she's a successful director, a sci-fi novelist with the Tenebrea series, and a mother of two, the role she once feared she might lose. Her days are quieter now, filled with creative work that doesn't require prosthetics, long nights, or hiding behind industrial equipment. Away from the starship, and away from the pressure, Roxann has built something simple and rare in Hollywood, a life that's genuinely her own. Robert Duncan McNeill as Tom Paris, the pilot who had to crash to find his real path. Robert Duncan McNeill, born in 1964 in North Carolina, was about 31 years old when he stepped into the flight suit of Tom Paris, the smooth, rebellious pilot of Star Trek Voyager. With a natural wit and a grin that suggested trouble, McNeill made Paris the kind of friend you'd trust in a crisis, even if he caused half of them. Beneath the humor, he gave the character a quiet guilt and restlessness that made Paris more human than heroic. While Paris navigated the Delta Quadrant, McNeill was navigating something far more unpredictable: Hollywood. During Voyager's very first season, McNeill had a near-fatal scare. While filming a shuttle crash stunt, a support cable snapped, throwing him forward and slamming his head against the windshield. On screen, it looked dramatic. Off-screen, it was a reminder that actors bleed for the illusion. But the deeper wound came later: typecasting. Hollywood froze him in place as the likable bad boy, charming but shallow, rebellious, but never leading man, serious. Roles that stretched him never came. He wasn't refused for lack of talent, but for lack of imagination on the industry's part. Today, Robert Duncan McNeill lives quietly and purposefully. He's a father of three, a director and producer whose work now defines him more than Tom Paris ever did. The pressure to be the cool rebel has long faded. In its place is the steady satisfaction of crafting stories from behind the lens. With Garrett Wang, he co-hosts The Delta Flyers, revisiting Voyager with humor and perspective, no stunts required. Tom Paris may have piloted Voyager, but Robert Duncan McNeill is the one who finally learned how to land his own life safely. Dwight Schultz as Reginald Barclay, the man who turned anxiety into a genius. Dwight Schultz, born in 1947 in Maryland, was around 48 years old when he slipped into the nervous brilliance of Lieutenant Reginald Barclay on Star Trek: The Next Generation and later Voyager. With trembling hands, soft eyes, and an almost painful sincerity, he transformed a socially anxious engineer into one of the franchise's most unexpectedly beloved figures. Fans laughed at Barclay, but they also rooted for him because Schultz made Barclay feel real vulnerable and deeply human at a time when television rarely allowed men to be fragile. What audiences never saw was how close Barclay sat to Schultz's own inner storms. For years, he battled severe anxiety, the kind that steals breath, sleep confidence. Playing Barclay wasn't just acting. It became a mirror he couldn't look away from. Each stutter, each awkward pause, each trembling moment was drawn from a well of lived fear. Fans adored the character, never knowing that the performance was part confession, part therapy. Outside the studio, Schultz lived another life of quiet risk. He was a licensed pilot drawn to the sky as a way to outrun the noise in his head. In 2019, a flight scare, a near accident caused by mechanical failure, reminded him how thin the line is between control and catastrophe. The world remembered Barclay for his holodeck fantasies. Dwight Schultz remembered how easily real life can break the illusion. In his 78s, Dwight Schultz lives far from the frantic rhythms of Hollywood. On a quiet farm shared with his wife, he has found something like equilibrium. His voice, warm, textured, unmistakably human, has carried him through acclaimed video game roles in Mass Effect Fallout and countless animated series where no camera waits to judge him. He once joked, "Barclay is me. The only difference is he has a steady job." But there's truth beneath the humor. Barclay showed the world that even the anxious can be heroic. Dwight Schultz, in his peaceful late years, has finally given that hero a place to rest. Marley McClean as Mezoti, the little Borg who vanished into real life. Marley McClean, born in 1987 in California, was about 13 years old when she appeared as Mezoti, the gentle Borg child introduced late in Star Trek Voyager. With wide, questioning eyes and a quiet vulnerability, she softened every scene she entered, becoming a rare symbol of innocence in a universe built on conflict. Fans remember her as the small girl reclaimed from the collective, delicate, cautious, reaching for humanity one breath at a time. But while Voyager carried Mezoti toward hope, real life carried Marley toward something far less cinematic obscurity. Behind the adorable Borg makeup was a child, navigating the strange loneliness of early fame. Marley worked on set surrounded by adults, tutors, and studio schedules, a world where she was celebrated one moment and forgotten the next. When Voyager ended and the spotlight dimmed, Marley was just 12 years old, standing at a crossroads Hollywood never prepared her for. No agents calling, no auditions, no future roles. She slipped out of the industry the way a quiet guest leaves a crowded room unnoticed, unmissed, unremembered by the machine that once embraced her. For a child, that silence can feel like erasure. Years later, she spoke of it with a soft ache, how people remembered Mezoti so clearly, yet walked past Marley without a second glance. Stardom had been a costume. Anonymity became her unchosen inheritance. In her 37s, Marley McClean lives a life as ordinary as Mezoti's was extraordinary. She went to college, built friendships, and carved a path far from cameras and conventions. No red carpets, no press tours, just the quiet dignity of a woman who chose normalcy over nostalgia. She sometimes reflects on her Voyager days with a kind of distant fondness, calling Mezoti a memory more famous than I'll ever be. But perhaps that is its own victory. The child who once played a reclaimed Borg eventually reclaimed herself fully, peacefully, and on her own terms. Alexander Enberg, as Ensign Vorik, the Vulcan who couldn't fully be home. Alexander Enberg, born April 5, 1972, was around 25 years old when he first appeared as Ensign Vorik on Star Trek Voyager. With his calm Vulcan composure, sharp ears, and a deeply logical mind, he gave Vorik a quiet intensity, a young engineer whose mind moved faster than most, but whose heart carried the weight of tradition and loneliness. Though not born on Vulcan, his disciplined presence made him feel almost spiritual, a figure of serene potential in the chaos of deep space. Behind Vorek's composed facade lay a deeper restlessness. Alexander, the son of public figures, grew up in a world that expected him to excel, and Voyager gave him a role that seemed made for someone so precise, so controlled. Moreover, being cast in recurring but limited roles reinforced a silent boundary. His talents seemed confined to a bracket not allowed to grow outside the Vulcan stereotype. He navigated a space that was secure yet emotionally isolating. For years, Vorek remained an ensign. The character never truly arrived as a leader, and Alexander carried that in his off-screen life too, as both gift and burden. Today, Alexander Enberg lives a quieter chapter. In his 53, he has stepped back from the spotlight of Voyager, instead weaving his creativity into other forms as an actor, as a special effects designer, and as someone who quietly shaped stories from behind the scenes. He voices his legacy in games and smaller roles, but none quite echo the disciplined Vulcan he once played. These real stories, fragile, hidden, sometimes heartbreaking, remind us that behind every starship and every heroic pose stood real human beings carrying fears, disappointments, and dreams they never got to finish. They gave us hope on screen, even while they weathered storms no script could soften. And perhaps that is the quiet nobility of their craft, sacrificing pieces of their own lives to gift us moments that will outlive them. So when you remember Voyager, remember not just the bridge, the battles, the legends, but the hearts behind the camera who endured, loved, and kept going. And now, tell me which Voyager character touched you the most. Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to like and subscribe as we continue exploring the stories where light and shadow walk side by side.